Thank you all for that warm response, and thank you for coming out on this hot afternoon for the last of 4 National Theatre platforms on this remarkable production of Angels in America. I'm Matt Wolfe, the London theatre critic of the International New York Times. At my far right, an actor who was part of a historic production on this very stage over a decade ago, Alan Bennett's wonderful play, The History Boys, which was then, of course, filmed. He's done television in America, Looking Quantico, A View from the Bridge on Broadway, and he's playing Joe Pitt, the Mormon, in Angels in America, Russell Tovey.
Thanks. Thank you. I'll clap you. I'll give you a clap. I'll introduce you.
And to my immediate right, and quite a profound thing for me, because this man is somebody I can honestly say, I think I've seen every single one of your New York stage appearances except Merlin. I first saw Nathan on Broadway in 1982 in a Circle in the Square revival of Present Laughter with George C. Scott, and it's been a great pleasure watching him ever since, most recently in New York in giving a fantastically feisty and fiery performance in The Front Page, and of course, remarkable as Roy Cohn in Angels in America, Nathan Lane. So, gentlemen, thank you both, of course, for being with us today. Maybe start with just a little bit about kind of what you knew about the play beforehand, because the play has been around a while. It was at the National in 1992. It was on Broadway, directed by George Wolfe. It had been filmed by Mike Nichols, but not everyone sees every play or every film. So when you came to do this, how much did you sort of know about it? How familiar were you with it?
I was familiar because I had seen the Broadway production and of course the Mike Nichols film on HBO, and there was an off-Broadway production in 2010 that I didn't see, but it was not a play or a role actually that was on my radar. It came up because. What do you want to talk? You talk a little about your
about your
about
your career.
No, I mean about your experience with the play.
Well, I saw the Mike Nichols HBO film when I was about 17, and I was in a relationship with someone I didn't really like, and we were in Rhodes, and he would go off. He was singing over there. He would go off and sing, and I watched the show back to back, and I remember being so inspired and going, "That is probably the best bit of TV I've ever seen." I'll probably say that to this day. I think it still is for me. And from that moment onwards, the angel Bethesda came because she's in a title sequence, and then at the end, when everyone's with the angel at the end, that became like a pilgrimage point for me. So for the last 10 years, from being in the History Boys, I've got selfies of me with parents, friends, ex-lovers, present lovers, dog, all with the angel in the background. So I slightly astral projected this angelically to sort of happen for me. So that was my journey into it. But I've never seen it on stage. I read it, obviously, after seeing the show, but I must have watched the show probably about 8-9 times all the way through.
Nathan, was it a part you had been coveting, circling? Did it come
No,
as a surprise to you?
that's what I was about to say. It came about because I was asked to have a dinner with Rufus Norris, who runs the theater in New York, because I was told he wanted to have more of a relationship with American actors and more of an exchange, and I said sure, and he's a lovely man, and we hit it off, and he mentioned it in passing. He said Marianne Elliott is going to direct Angels in America, and he said, and you could play Roy Cohn, but that would be up to her, and he made it seem, it was like just sort of very offhand, and I thought, oh well, they'll get some great British actor to do it, and so we talked about other plays, and then a month or so later they offered it to me, and I was surprised, and then I had a lunch with Marianne in New York, and she said, "Oh well, that's why I sent him over to get you," but he's so shy. So anyway, and certainly I knew it was a great part. I had seen it done, and then I reread the play, and it was other than having to leave home for 7 months, which was a huge commitment. It was kind of a no-brainer because it's such a tremendous role, and the play is monumental.
People may or may not realize when the play was first done at the National in 1992, there was a year gap between Millennium Approaches and Perestroika, during which time there was also a cast change. So that original cast of Millennium Approaches never actually did Perestroika. And at that time, I remember it well because I was here for it, they were really regarded almost as two separate plays. Now Tony has them published together, although he writes about them in different ways. He has distinct feelings about each one. So my question is, do you see them as two different plays, or is it just part of one huge package?
I personally see them as two different plays, obviously part of the same world, and we're the through line. But to me, and I think most of us, speak for most of us, Millennium feels very concise, knows what it is exactly, it's very sharp, it's an hour shorter. And then Perestroika is more poetic and dreamlike and drifty, and I think with the staging of Perestroika as well, it has this kind of more dreamlike quality. So they are definitely two different energies. Am I wrong saying that?
No, whatever you want to say. It's,
Right.
it's a free country.
Yeah, it is, you're right.
It's my country, you have to worry about saying the wrong thing.
So,
Oh, well, I see it more as a huge package. If you know what I mean. I'm always more interested in the huge package. Yeah, I do see it as it is a long journey. I mean, yes, famously, Millennium is the well-made play,
Right.
and Perestroika is the unwieldy one,
Yeah.
and the more poetic and surreal, and but it has some of the best writing is in Perestroika, and so yes, to me it does feel as tiring as it is to do the two-show day. I find it more satisfying because we're going to tell the entire story.
How do you feel on a two-show day, Russell? Do you have to gear yourself up for it? Are you downing vitamins backstage? What's happening?
I mean, I take Barocca, but I don't know. You just get your head in the place. I mean, this show, once you're in it, you can't escape. You're ratcheting along, and it's. I'm just going back to that about the two plays, though. We don't ever refer to it as part one, part two. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? We always refer to it as Millennium or Perestroika. It's like, so it does feel for me two separate pieces. But yes, when you are doing a two-show day, there is definitely a mindset you get in. But the best thing about this is that this is the most hyped show that I've ever been a part of, and it was completely sold out and bigged up before it opened. So the pressure was on us for this show, and thankfully it done incredibly well. So when you're doing that 14 hours of stage work, and the audience's response at the end is what we're getting, it was a relief, and it's amazing, and you're doing it. If you was going out there and there's like 4 people, and then one leaves in the interval, it would be horrible. It would be horrible. I did a production of the Laramie Project once with Andrew Garfield, and one of the worst times, it was 9 actors, and it was a space which isn't there anymore called the Sound Theatre, which is in Leicester Square, and it probably sat about 500 people, and there was 3 people. There's a couple there, and then there was Charles Spencer, the Telegraph.
Oh yeah, from the Telegraph.
Critic. So none of us were doing anything to him. We were doing it all to this couple here who were like terrified. Interval came. Only one of them came back because one of them felt ill. So there was 9 of us giving this show to a critic. We were trying to ignore, and this poor woman by herself.
Yeah.
She had the night of her life, but it was horrific.
Yeah.
It was just like, what's this about?
I think you can rely on this production, people coming back
Yes.
for more. In fact, Nathan, on the press day, which I was at, it was very touching at the curtain call. It looked, as you were bowing, as if you were mouthing the word wow. It looked like it, and I thought that must be obviously a sense of incredible achievement. How has it felt for you?
Well, we rehearsed over 3 months, and it was very intense. And the process here is different because we rehearsed over 3 months, and then they give you like 10 minutes to tech it and get it on stage. And here, put this on, and it's sort of like, hey, yeah, just get on with it. And so you have very few previews. I mean, the press day that you attended, that was only the second time we'd ever done the whole thing. Okay. So you're working on adrenaline and fear and a lot of things, and it's you're still getting used to the set and so yes, it was a great feeling of accomplishment, and obviously you want to live up to the writing, which is extraordinary, and you try to do your best and not get in its way, and just tell this story because it's so beautiful what he's written, and you just want to honor that, and certainly we all. The other feeling was that we all bonded over that period of time in a rehearsal room, and because it is a hard play. It's tricky, and so that brought us, I think, closer together, and it was so. By the end of that day, I had a friend here, Scott Whitman, writer, lyricist, who. Was just knocked out by it, and I was grateful to have someone that I knew here because, we were obviously just so happy. Everyone keeps telling me, people here don't react that way at the end of plays, especially at the National. They tend not to stand up and cheer, and so it was very, very moving to see that. And I think the great feeling is that it's a lot of people who don't know the play, who are discovering it for the first time, and they're knocked out by it, the writing as well.
I was thinking two of Nathan's defining stage performances in New York recently, one in the front page, the other in The Iceman Cometh, have been plays where he makes a much delayed entrance. Well into the play in both cases. In this play, you're there right after the rabbi. You guys are right there and you're doing hold, and you've got that amazing telephone scene. What is that like, Nathan, to kind of kick off this extraordinary play from the start?
Well, it's always a little terrifying. It's just that that's a tricky thing because Russell, even though he's in a way, my focal point. I'm doing a lot of the talking, and so it's always a little nerve-wracking. Now we're more relaxed about it, but in the beginning it was slightly terrifying that I'll pushing the buttons at the right time and making the right noises and getting all of that together. But it's a scene about he's showing off. And he wants him to see what his world is. And that's underneath all of that technical stuff, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to impress him. He's sort of flirting a little and showing him what his world is and could he fit in and become a Roy boy, so to speak. And because he's looking to possibly send someone into the Justice Department because he's got this, he knows, he's smelling that there's the potential disbarment, and so it's all of that is sort of what's really going on, but you've got to be doing all this other stuff and have conversations with 5 other people on the phone. So
it certainly works.
That's the challenge. Oh, thank you.
I love the phrase Roy boy. That's a great word.
A Roy boy, yeah, that's what he used to call that's what the real guy, Roy Cohn, used to say.
Of course, we have to talk about your characters. Joe Pitt is, as far as I'm aware, a fictional character. Roy Cohn is unfortunately not a fictional character. Russell, I wonder if you could just say something about, as someone who is so wonderfully and happily at peace with your sexuality as you are, what is it like inhabiting this character who is so tormented by his?
Well, I got to go home every night to my boyfriend and lay in bed with my boyfriend and be like, it's all right. So I didn't carry him with me too much, but to exist in that state must be exhausting, and it's I don't know, he's just incredibly damaged individual who's numb. He's numbed himself, and he hides behind so much that isn't there, and it's tough. And I wanted to make him, I think, because it feels like he could be the one that people project onto because he's Republican, because he's a Mormon, because of his values, because he's treated his wife badly, he's not come out to her, so he's kind of destroying her life, taking him with him, that people would project onto him that he's kind of a bad person, but I desperately wanted to make him feel real and people to connect with him and to understand him and not see him as like a monster. And I think, I mean, I haven't seen enough productions, but from what I've heard, people have said that a lot of people find Joe Pitt like they go, and then at the end, when he's fucked at the end, when she just gives him the tablets and leaves him with a slap, people are like, good. And I didn't want, I think I read once there was an applause, and I was like, but I never wanted anyone to ever feel like pleased for Joe's downfall. And he doesn't like get his ending. And his mum's friends with all the gays. And she's got a new haircut by the fountain. But her son, who's gay, is like, where is he? Where is he?
But that's a really interesting point, because Joe is left out of that wonderful
Yeah.
quartet at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, Roy's too, but Roy's dead by then. And you think, well, what's Joe's salvation? What's his moment? Did you and Tony Kushner discuss that at all?
I didn't think we got time. I wanted to. There was a rumor at some point that he wanted to write a third play about the Pitts, which I'm pitching. But otherwise, no. I mean, in the HBO show, there's a scene where they're watching carol singers. He's watching carol singers, and then his mum turns up and says, "I'll see you at home later." And you know, it's desperately unhappy that he's living back with his mum, who he hates. But then it's like there's some glimmer of hope, and there's a relationship repair that's going on there, and that's gonna. You can then go, okay, well, there's life. Whereas he's left just vibrating in this place of absolute sadness. And does he deserve that? I don't think so. So I wanted to make sure that he was a character that people feel for and understand and don't just project onto as being Donald Trump.
Nathan, you have been in a relationship for several decades, recently got married, many congratulations. How does that, with that knowledge of the world you inhabit as you, how do you deal with Roy Cohn's level of self-loathing and self-disgust?
Well, first you do a lot of research. I mean, and there isn't a lot written about him. There's a lot written about the McCarthy era in the 50s, but there's only this biography, Citizen Cohn, and then there's his autobiography, which is hilarious. That he was desperate to get out before he died. But that's sort of interesting too. It was written with this kind of questionable reporter, Sidney Zion. It's all, like many people or therapists might tell you, it all goes back to his childhood. And he was the only child. He was a little Jewish prince, and he was treated that way. He was very close to his mother. I think he had an uncle who went to jail for something shady, and they ran a bank. The family ran a bank, and he went to jail for several years. And the WASPs. The WASP bankers brought down this little bank, and Uncle Bernie was sent to jail. I think he realized he could never. He was different, and he was different because he was Jewish, and he was different because he was gay, and he could never allow himself to be vulnerable. That was the lesson he learned very early. And he was precocious. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant guy. If only he had used it for good rather than evil. But he was, as a kid, he was getting his teacher got a parking ticket. He got on a payphone and called up his father, who was a judge, and got the teacher, his parking ticket, taken care of. So he was power brokering, as a kid, because that's what he ultimately, even though he loved the law, as Donald Trump once said, he's a genius, but he's a lousy lawyer. Many people hired him just to frighten off the opposition because they didn't want to have to deal with him because he was just, it was easy to find people who hated him. So I talked to some people who were loyal to him, who loved him.
Oh, that's interesting.
People who were, he was just fascinating to be around. Liz Smith, the columnist, mostly gossip columnists, Cindy Adams and Liz Smith, and you know that she had hated him from afar when she grew up in Texas, but she said to see him in action in New York was an amazing thing. He was such you know, I mean, he was everywhere, and he was all, you know, he planted items in the columns. He was always from the get-go, when he was working for McCarthy, he was close to columnists, and he would have items planted about himself. Or and then later on, he would have items planted that he was dating so-and-so, or he was engaged to Barbara Walters, and because they were friends because he had helped Barbara Walters' father get out of a bad scrape, and so she was forever grateful to him for that. So, you know, look, he could be fun. You know, as Cindy Adams said, if he liked you, he was great. He was loyal, he was loving, he was charming, but if he didn't, he would kill you. And I sort of understand what the world that he traveled in, representing, you know, mafia dons and titans of industry. He just could not be gay. Now, after his mother died, as time went on, after his mother died, she was, and you know, that was a very unhealthy relationship.
What was the thing about his mum ringing around when he didn't come
Oh
home?
yeah, no, his mother was ridiculous. Even he was now in his 40s, and she would call up his coworkers and say I don't know where he is. You know, it's raining. He didn't have an umbrella. And you know, they lived together for years in this townhouse, in this shambling townhouse, and it's, you know, I don't want to go on and on, but I already have. But you know, it's interesting. You know, you also have to separate the real Roy Cohn from Tony Kushner's Roy Cohn, and they meet here and there, they intersect, but you know, Tony has created a character that I feel empathy with. And I mean, the real guy was despicable. You know, he was just, and, you know, people always describe him as pure evil. When he died of AIDS, people said it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Yeah.
So but in Tony's hands, it makes for a fascinating character. And like as Russell was saying, you know, what I wanted to do was show you who the human being underneath all of these despicable acts, you know, and that you see occasionally, you know, the thing about once he got AIDS, it's the one thing that stopped him. He actually said to somebody, and it sounds like a line from the play, "I can fix anything, but I can't fix this." Mm-hmm. And it stopped him in his tracks, and in a way, it did humanize him. And so in terms of as the progression of the disease in perestroika, for me, that's sort of the most interesting stuff as he's getting worse and worse, and how that affects him, and the relationship he develops with Belize. So it's endlessly interesting and challenging. Yeah. The play. It always is. You come back to it and you're like, wow, and you know, either you see something new, or it is exciting material to work on every night.
That's a wonderful response. And just following up from that for a second, there's another American actor in London at the moment whom you will know, F. Murray Abraham, who has played Roy Cohn before in New York. And I had the pleasure of interviewing him a few weeks ago in a different context. And he was saying, we were talking about this production, and he said the problem for him about Roy Cohn was he hated him. He just hated him, and he couldn't get around that every show. Whereas it sounds from what you're saying as if you're able to bypass that and find the humanity.
I think you have to. You can't, you know, he didn't think he was evil. He thought he was a swell guy. But, you know, he was, and look, you know, there are parts of him you can find that, you know, he could do nice things for people. He was very loyal. God, he was loyal, loyalty. And it's a word that comes up a lot in the play, loyalty. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, the other word that comes up a lot is need. You know, he doesn't want to need anybody. You know, when he says to Joe, why would you need it? Need, you know, when Joe says, I need him. You know, he's talking about Lewis. Mm-hmm. I need him. And he says, you need. You know, it's like, don't allow yourself to be vulnerable. You don't need anybody. Live in the raw wind, naked, alone. Learn what you're capable of, and don't let anything stand in your way. You know, it's frightening advice, but it's how he weathered some really tough situations, bad situations.
And I think what's so fascinating in the play is for all the vitriol, that final scene, because you guys have a lot of defining scenes together, that final scene between the two of you, the last thing you do is give him advice about love.
Yeah, but I think it's all happening in Joe's head.
Okay.
It's Joe giving himself that
So
advice.
this is Joe imagining. How do you trace your character's relationship with Roy through the play?
I think there's an underlying daddy complex. I think Roy even says it, he allows himself to imagine Roy as being his mentor, as someone who's going to protect him and look after him and bring him up the ranks and raise him. But there's also a sexual undercurrent, I think, that he's either aware of.
You think?
But whether Joe is aware of that or not aware of that, he absolutely basks in the attention that he receives from this very powerful, very in-charge man. And for Joe, who's very, like, kind of held back and numb, that is fantastic, because it doesn't seem a lot of other people are giving him a lot of interest, and suddenly this man comes along who's like king of the walk, and for Joe that's incredibly exciting and sexy. I don't think he's aware of that. So when they have that kiss at the end, I think that's like saying goodbye to Daddy, but also getting a bit of sex in there with Dad. I mean,
Well,
I
it's a kind of bookend to the scene, the awful scene in my townhouse at the end, towards the end of Millennium, when,
Right.
you know, I've unleashed all of this stuff on him
Yeah.
that I can't take anymore. His wishy-washiness, because you want to be nice, and you can't be nice if you want to get what you want, or do what you need to do. But he does, when he's shaking him and saying, "What do you want?" Then he goes to kiss him, and then he pushes him away and goes to hit him. So it's an interesting thing that at that point, in Joe's head, there's a sort of a tender kiss between the two of them. It's it's a strange moment, and yet it's
Very haunting.
yeah.
haunting, but it's probably the moment of real, pure intimacy between two men for Joe in the play, because he's had Lewis, and that's been very kind of animalistic, and that is just a moment of absolute honesty, I think, isn't it? And for Joe, that's probably, he needs that truthfulness. He says, "Show me a little of what you've learned in the world, baby Joe," and that's like, this is who I am now, maybe.
We mentioned, Nathan, in passing, but we should, of course, return a little bit to he who shall not be named, but I'm afraid must be named, i.e. the current American president and his relationship with Roy Cohn, because when Ron Liebman played it on Broadway, when Al Pacino played it for Mike Nichols, that didn't matter, that wasn't relevant. Now you can't extricate that fact from the performance of the play. Tell us about how that feels to you.
Well, it's not. I don't think about it. I mean, it's been brought up to me, and it's certainly when you hear some of the things he's saying, you go, "Gee, that rings a bell."
Oh yeah.
And they met. He saw him. Trump saw Roy Cohn in a club, and went up to him, and Trump and his father Fred were being. There was an discrimination lawsuit against them because they were not selling or renting to blacks or minorities of any kind, and so they had this huge lawsuit, and it wasn't going well. And he went up to Roy and said, "What would you do?" And he said, "Fuck them, sue them." So and he hired him, and they created this anti-defamation lawsuit for $100 million, and just to sort of distract, and eventually they settled, but Trump declared it a victory, and which you might have seen him do several times over the last year, and so. He became his lawyer and mentor. So you're seeing a cruder version of Roy's tactics, which are, if anyone attacks you, come right back at them harder and accuse them of the same thing, only worse, and deflect, just attack and deflect, and so he taught him well, and you hear it. I mean, it's not something that plays into what I'm doing in the play. I mean, it's interesting, I read an article in Vanity Fair about Trump and Roy and Roger Stone, and how it's ruining America. But they talk about in the article Roy's desperate childlike need to be liked, and also his kind of unrequited crushes on big, good-looking, waspy guys. And so it's sort of interesting how that's sort of in the play, and Trump sort of fell into that when he was young, and people said Roy sort of had a crush on him too. I mean, there's a film now out about Roger Stone, who's in terms of dirty politics, he's really the dirtiest. And he helped the Trump campaign, but he started with the Reagan campaign many, many years ago as a young man, and sort of had Reagan saying, "Make America Great Again," and he has done the same for Trump, and really, is, I would say, has largely responsible for, I think, the success of Trump and his campaign. So there's a piece of film where Roy talks about Trump and says, I think he's the closest thing to a genius I've ever met, he says. Wow. It's unbelievable. Anyway, yes, the Trump factor, I'm aware of it, but it doesn't really enter into, it's about, relationships and the scenes. I'm not thinking one day I'll find some guy and make him president.
Let's talk a little bit about how you both have adjusted to the rhythm of doing this play, 2-part, 7.5, whatever it is, hours. Andrew and Denise were talking about that a couple weeks ago very eloquently. Nathan, I remember many years ago, I think it was the Drama Desk Awards, when you won for the producers, and you gave this hilarious speech detailing all the kind of medications that had gotten you through the run, because vocally, playing Max Bialystock was exhausting. Does this compare? Or Hickey? I mean, how are these all?
Yeah, I'll just say that, when we started here, one of the things everyone kept coming up and telling me was, this is the most difficult theater to play at the National. It's a really difficult house. And when we started, and I found out, yes, it is. It's a very difficult house. We wear mics in Perestroika. Do you wear a mic in the first play?
As an ancestor.
I don't use a mic in the first play, except when we're the ancestors. There are mics in the costumes. But in Perestroika, there's so many intimate scenes, and there's nothing to bounce the sound off of up here, because it's just this vast wasteland. And so I had to wear a mic. But it is a strain. It's a tough house, and so in the beginning, you start to think, oh, it's dead. I can't be heard, and you work a little too hard. But as the run has gone on, I have figured out how to save myself, because when you're doing 7.5 hours, you have to figure out where you can pull back a little and still have the same effect, and because there are big emotional scenes of anger and rage, and so that's been an interesting thing to, it's like any play. You figure out how are you going to get through all these performances and say, protect your voice.
You, of course, had experience at this stage, Russell, famously with Mr. Bennett's play, so the stage was familiar to you, but how has it been with this?
The same. The set looks incredible, but when we first got on it, it's so hard to pitch where you're going with it, because it's been a really tough gig, this one, like vocally, and how you can't, like we're sitting here now and it feels great, but when you're doing it, you can't gauge it, can you? It's like it's taken us all a long time to feel where we can go, and sometimes you're too loud or you're too quiet. It's been tough, but other than that, it's been brilliant to be back here. And we're in rep.
yeah.
We're in rep. We get a bit of time
Get
off,
some time
so
off.
you cane it and then you have a few days off. If it was solid, like 8 shows a week, solid, I think a few of us would be getting ill if you haven't had that time to.
Yeah, I mean, the schedule here it's wacky. And you do 6, and then you have 4 days off. It's just, you never know, and if you're not feeling up to par, it's kind of great to have that amount of time off, because you really can catch up and get better.
I'm glad, Nathan, that you mentioned, because spoiler ahead for those of you who haven't seen the plays, but both of you play other roles in addition to Roy and Joe, and wonderful, I mean, particularly the priors, as it were, prior 1 and 2, where, Nathan, maybe your next thing should be restoration comedy, because it's waiting to happen. And then you play angels in this kind of weird consortium in Perestroika. Tell us about those, but does it kind of feel like being on holiday from the play?
Yes, it does.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, no, it is, and yes, they're audience favorites.
They are. Well, they've become a favourite for us. But
Yeah.
I'll be honest though, when we first started rehearsing them, I was so trying to pin down Joe, and then we kept having to rehearse the ancestors, and we'd have to rehearse the heaven bit, and I was just like, fuck off, we need to focus on this guy, and we'd keep doing these rehearsals. So I was a bit frustrated to begin with. But now I'm like, it's like one of my favourite bits.
Maybe Tony should spin them off into a play for
The heralds.
themselves.
Oh yeah, he did write. He had to, because there's such a quick change for me from Roy to the ancestor towards the very end of the play. He did write some new material to cover the change, which is, he gave you essentially a lot of dick jokes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then gave me that thing about
Clasp.
what?
The clasp.
No, that is, no one laughs, but it is.
It's a nice word, isn't it? Clasp.
I do apologize for my tardiness, but I was having a bit of trouble with the clasp. Anyway.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
We should say a little bit about, because this will be streamed on a podcast so people can listen to it in perpetuity. You're getting ready for NT Live. The first part will be later this week, second part next week. How far along are you with that? What are your feelings about that? Is that going to be a whole different thing? What are you thinking with NT Live?
Well, we've rehearsed it. We had the camera rehearsals in here, which was tough to kind of do a full performance for cameras with nobody there, but we did that, and they've got all their shots set up, so we're ready to go on Thursday, I think. I don't know what it's going to be like, because it's going to be a different audience to a theatre audience, because half the seats are taken out for camera rigging.
Right.
But
I've done a couple of these things for PBS in
of
America.
course.
I've done. They filmed The Man Who Came to Dinner live, and a play I did for Lincoln Center called The Nance, where they came in and over 3 days they filmed 3 different performances. But yeah, it's always a little weird, because they're filming a stage performance, so we're not doing a movie. It's odd, and ultimately you have to let go of thinking about
millions of people watching it.
Well, yeah, millions of people watching, or just across the country, but just also think, I have to now just make this a cinematic performance, because you have to serve the play and the people who are there.
We're there in the moment.
In the theater seeing it. But
one thing, Nathan, that I wonder what your thoughts are, there haven't been that many American actors who've been on stage at the National. John Lithgow, Laurie Metcalf, whom we were talking about before. We're always, as Americans, wondering in America, could we ever have a national theater? People have tried. There are various equivalents, but nothing quite like this. Now that you're actually working here, what's your feeling about this building, and do you wish more than ever that America had one, or is it unique to here?
sure, I wish we had one. I don't know if the theater is as built into our DNA as it is here. And you know, one of the great things about this place is you show up and you see everybody. You see young people, you see old people, you see children. You see they're all on their computers. They're all no one's talking to one another. They're on their phones. But there's this community of. And it's like a supermarket of theater here, where there's just things are happening. One of the most interesting things about being backstage is in the dressing room, you don't hear the shows, but you hear people getting their half-hour calls for these other shows. So I've heard, now we've been here so long, I've heard Common and Consent, and when they're getting ready, and with Barbershop Chronicles, and and then every once in a while you hear you're like, what's that? Flying Dragons? They're having Flying Dragons is having its tech rehearsal apparently, and I hope that goes well. And it's so, there's nothing like it, and I don't know whether, if it could happen. I mean, they're having, funding is always an issue, and so in America, a national theater, I mean, in a way, Lincoln Center is sort of maybe the closest we have to something like that, but it's an extraordinary place, and certainly when I was asked to do it, that was a part of the appeal, was to just the history of being in this center of culture, and to be where so many great actors have stood and so many great plays. It's a privilege and an honor to be here, and. So yeah, I mean, God knows, I would love something like this in New York, but or wherever they want to have one. But it's I just don't think it would be sustained. But it's a miracle that it happens here, and it's a tribute to not only to the people behind it, but the audiences who support it.
Playing American, Nathan's the real deal. But one of the things that is extraordinary from American friends of mine who've seen this play is I've never once heard, oh, it's Nathan and all these British actors, even though Andrew's half American. Is it just because everyone now knows how to do it? It's in their DNA. You played an American play on Broadway, A View from the Bridge. Tell us about that.
Well, it's slightly. I mean, we had like Sesame Street growing up, so you do slightly have them. And if our British shows get revoiced with American voices, but we're quite happy to have the American voices as kids here. So you have that sort of twang in your ear and Friends and everything. That's American TV has been a staple for us. And I don't.
In the beginning, Joe Pitt sounded like Oscar the Grouch.
He still does some nights. But, I mean, I've been lucky enough to work over there a few times, and being a bit of a knob, I do walk around in the American accent, just staying in it until someone says, Russell? I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, it is me, until you get busted. But so I spent a lot of time staying in that, which has been beneficial, actually. So
no, they're impeccable. Really, it's really.
You do give me notes every now and then.
Out. Yeah, well, sure. Every time, you were saying
Isaac.
For Isaac, yeah, you said Isaac, and then Maryland. You were saying. I said it Maryland. It's an American would say Maryland, but no.
And I see your face every time I say that.
What?
I see your face and Meryl Streep and the word Lund whenever I come to that line. Maryland.
Yeah. No, they're amazing. They've done, yes. I was really impressed by all of that. Just and they obviously we had great dialect.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
People here.
Yeah.
We have to bring this to a close, which is a shame, but please join me in thanking Nathan Lane and Russell Tovey.
Thanks, mate. Thank you, mate.